Welcome to The Explainer. You know, it's pretty amazing when you stop and think about it. How did we end up in a world where a single click can connect you to someone on the complete opposite side of the planet? Today, we're going to trace that incredible journey to becoming what we now call the global village.
So yeah, how did we get here? Well, it's a huge story, one that unfolds over literally thousands of years. It's got chapters on survival, on power, on terrible conflict, and ultimately on a shared destiny. So let's dive in.
You can basically break this whole human journey down into 4 big stages. We started out just trying to survive. Then we moved into a long age of domination. After that, we started to learn some hard lessons about cooperation, and now we find ourselves in an era of deep interdependence.
All right, first up, let's rewind all the way back. We're going to look at how humanity went from these tiny, isolated groups to building the very first massive connections that would one day span entire continents.
You know, our first connections were super local, driven by simple things like trading goods and family ties. But then, as the first big civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia grew, so did our world. The real game changer, though? That was the Silk Road. And it wasn't just about silk. It was this incredible channel for everything. Ideas like Buddhism spreading to China, technology like papermaking traveling west. And later, these connections were kind of supercharged by vast empires, like the Mongols, creating a truly intercontinental network for the very first time.
Okay, so connections are growing, but they also started to change. This next stage in our journey is absolutely pivotal, and honestly, it's a pretty painful part of the story. The world didn't just get more connected, it became fundamentally unequal. So, starting around the 15th century and going all the way to the 19th, a whole new era kicked off. European exploration didn't just put new places on the map, it created a brand new global power dynamic. This was the dawn of colonialism, and it would completely reshape how the world interacted for centuries to come.
And what this did was create 2 just completely different realities. For the colonizing powers in Europe, it meant an age of unbelievable wealth and global influence. But for millions upon millions in Asia, Africa, and the Americas, it brought exploitation, the loss of their resources, and the crushing of their cultures. For them, getting connected to the world came at a staggering cost.
So after centuries of this top-down domination, the 20th century just explodes onto the scene. It was a time of massive contradictions. I mean, it was defined by the most destructive wars in all of human history, but also by the first real serious attempts to build a framework for global cooperation.
I mean, the 20th century was just a whirlwind, right? You had 2 devastating world wars, and out of those ashes, you get this new hope for peace, the United Nations. But that hope was almost immediately fractured by the massive ideological divide of the Cold War. And at the exact same time, all those old colonial empires started to crumble, and dozens of newly independent nations stepped onto the world stage, demanding that their voices finally be heard.
And for almost 50 years, this was the main event on the world stage. It wasn't really a direct war between the 2 superpowers, but it was an intense ideological battle for influence that was fought all over the globe. Your relationship with the rest of the world pretty much depended entirely on which side of this line you fell on. And that, of course, brings us right up to today. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the explosion of new technologies, they've pushed us into our current stage, the global village. I mean, a world that is more connected and tangled up than ever before in history.
So what's the engine behind all this? Well, you can think of it as 4 massive forces all working at once. You've got the digital connection from the internet, the economic engine of global trade, the physical connection of mass air travel, and the cultural connection of global media. Each one plays a huge part in weaving our modern world so tightly together.
Now, when you're this interconnected, you absolutely need some rules of the road. And we see that in powerful economic groups like the European Union or ASEAN in Southeast Asia. We see it in new geopolitical groups like BRICS, which brings together major emerging economies. And of course, in long-standing security alliances like NATO. Nations are now formally working together on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a century ago.
But of course, there's always a flip side to all this connection, isn't there? Being interdependent doesn't just magically get rid of conflict. We see that with major power rivalries and regional wars that have huge global consequences. And maybe even more important, our biggest threats are now shared threats. Things like climate change, pandemics, global terrorism. These are problems that couldn't care less about borders. The bottom line is, our fates are now totally linked, for better and for worse.
Whew. So after that whirlwind tour through thousands of years of history, where does that actually leave us? Let's take a second to recap our incredible story.
So, let's just recap that journey real quick. We went from local survival to unequal domination through brutal conflict that actually forced cooperation, and now into our current era of deep interdependence and shared challenges. It's been a wild ride, but you can see a clear evolution.
And this all leaves us with a very modern dilemma, which I think this quote captures perfectly. Our future really does seem to depend on finding this delicate balance. Continuing to compete, yes, but also figuring out how to cooperate to solve the massive challenges that affect every single one of us.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question we want to leave you with. We've seen the stories so far, but the next chapter, well, it's still unwritten. In a world this deeply, deeply connected, what do you think it's going to look like? Thanks for watching.